makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part.
All right, my apologies again for not making a video in a few days, and I have no excuse other than the fact that I'm having an amazing time in Budapest and just been out almost all day. When I come back, I'm tired and I don't want to do a video, or I'm going out. So, yeah, sorry, but I did see something that is quite interesting and it's worth making a video. And especially because it is from someone who, well, as of late, I'm just going to say, has not had the best takes on economics. That's all I'm going to say. And that is, of course, Paul Krugman. And I've had some issues with his take on modern monetary theory, which I think he has been way too critical of. But he made a thread on Twitter today that on inflation, which I think really nails the state of play right now and why there is a serious problem with the way that economists in general, econ Twitter, has a very ideologically fanatical view of what the causes of inflation are and why this doesn't correspond with reality. So let's see. Okay. Yeah, he's basically saying he's going to start the thread. Weigh in today with a very long thread on inflation, especially the weirdly ugly debate over price gouging. Now, if you are on the left and you follow some of the more well-known personalities on the left who dabble in economics here and there, especially people like, for example, Matt Stoller, who is his specialty is things that are related to competition and antitrust. And he's been writing a lot over the past couple of months on how the inflation surge is, to a large extent, being caused by decisions within firms, as in firms explicitly using it to price gouge their consumers and finding an environment in which this kind of activity is both politically tolerable and sadly there's not much that consumers can do against it. Now, people like Stoller have been very much criticized by sort of mainstream Twitter economists because the standard explanation from economists is that this is still, a phenomenon that you could understand from a basic intro to macroeconomics textbook. The U.S. economy was overheating after COVID. Then there are, global supply issues. Then there was the war in Ukraine that has raised commodity prices. So all of this, standard textbook explanations explain the majority of inflation. And this price gouging thing is just a lefty complaint. But as it turns out, Paul Krugman disagrees. And, by the standards of mainstream economists, Paul Krugman is slightly to the left of most of them, but I don't think he's on the left by any stretch of the imagination. So it is good, I think, to have a voice that comes with the authority of a Nobel Prize and the authority of, a New York Times pundit. Because let's be honest, the New York Times is not covering this the way that they should. So, what does he say? First, where are we on inflation? As I read it, we probably have underlying inflation of 3.5 to 4%, with a higher headline rate reflecting probably temporary factors like supply chain disruptions and Ukraine fallout. I don't think this is controversial in any way. What he's basically saying is inflation of 3.5 or 4 is above what you would want. The Federal Reserve targets a 2% inflation rate. So this is clearly stating that there are underlying inflation pressures, which makes sense because the US economy suffered quite tremendously from COVID, but then bounced back the year after, so last year, 2021, which is not the experience of every other country. But the US did particularly well. And part of it is because they did spend a lot on boosting unemployment insurance, things like that. So, surprising for a country that usually does not take care of its workers and its poor. The COVID response, at least economically, I think was good. There were obviously certain policies that I think they should have extended, etc. The Biden's COVID bill, almost all their good provisions were temporary, and I think some of them should have been extended. But overall, I would say the response was, around as good, at least, as most European countries. And all the more considering the US doesn't have the welfare state that European countries do. So, I mean, in comparison, Mexico, which has a left-wing government, gave zero to people. Zero. Okay? $1 trillion economy, second largest economy in Latin America, gave zero to its people. Anyway, let's continue. That's another story. That's too high, but we don't have spiraling inflation due to unanchored expectations. Consumer surveys suggest medium-term inflation expectations have remained fairly stable. So, yeah, I mean, there's really no risk that, even if these underlying other pressures were not occurring, there's no risk of inflation in the US kind of going out of control due to expectations. So we have near-term wage expectations, indicator of underlying inflation, running about a point below recent wage hikes. So far, so good. Bond market seems to expect elevated inflation for the next year or so, but more or less normal inflation after that. So again, this fits the narrative that even though the inflation pressure is definitely more significant than perhaps people thought a couple of months ago, it's still in the medium term seen as a temporary phenomenon. What story makes sense here? I'd say that we have a moderately overheated economy that the Fed should be and already is acting to cool off. Interest rates relevant to real spending are way up, plus stuff that is, yes, transitory. So, yes, I have my issues on this idea that the automatic response to inflation should be rate hikes, because basically the reason that you raise interest rates when you have inflation is what you want to do is basically curtail consumption, curtail domestic demand. So people spend less, people find a premium towards saving rather than spending, or simply things become, things that have an interest rate attached to them become more expensive. So you don't spend. And by not spending, that eases the prices on all the other goods that you would have been spending on, reducing demand, and prices will not fall, but not rise at the rate that they were before. This makes sense when you have an economy that is overheating. And so if the argument simply was that the US economy is overheating, then this would be the rational response to it. I would say that the US is a bit addicted to low interest rates anyway, so it's probably a good idea to raise rates, even in a different context, even if inflation was not this problematic. In other countries, I would say the answer might be different. So, for example, Mexico has also been raising rates, except Mexico's economy is not overheating. If anything, Mexico's economy is a bit struggling. So, in that case, I would actually argue that the rise in interest rates is kind of pointless, because if you're basically suffering from imported inflation, then really what you're doing is kind of impoverishing your own people by raising rates. And you have to make a very big assumption that the demand of all the items that you expect will no longer rise as much as they should because of the interest rates, will offset the increase in prices that you're getting from abroad. And, off the bat, you can't really say that. So different scenarios, and, any good economist knows that what applies to one country at one point in time does not necessarily apply to another country on a different point of time, or, different context at the same point of time. And even if both countries are facing the exact same global problem, that still doesn't mean the recipe should be the same one. Anyway, What about price gouging? Elizabeth Warren and other Democrats have been arguing that some companies are taking advantage of an inflationary economy to increase markups, making inflation worse. Many economists disagree, which is a defensible position. But the vitriolic nature of their attacks, talking like gouging is prescribing ivermectin or injecting bleach, is weirdly over the top and should provoke some self-reflection. I agree. The reaction to this has ironically been very similar to Krugman's own reaction to modern monetary theory, and also to his objection to price caps, because Paul Krugman made some comments that he later apologized to a German economist called Isabella Weber over an article in The Guardian that I thought was pretty sensible, which was basically just put price caps on the very few select number of goods that are spiraling out of control. Not to turn into a command economy where every item has a price cap. Simply, if you're in a situation where a few items are the ones that are seeing prices spiral out of control, put price caps just on those. I think that's a sensible position. Krugman didn't think so. But now he's definitely kind of tempering his opinion on this, because a few months back, he was that guy he's now describing. Yeah. Consider three positions. Gouging is the main cause of inflation. 2. Gouging could be a contributory factor. 3. Gouging cannot possibly be a cause of inflation, and anyone saying otherwise is ignorant and dangerous. And a leftist. Position number 1 is clearly wrong. Yeah, obviously. I don't know any prominent figure who holds it. I've also not seen anyone. I mean, even like someone like Matt Stoller, I don't think has ever said that that's the only reason. On the other hand, position number 3 is also dubious economics. Gouging is probably a small factor, but it could be a factor. Why the vitriol? Now, he's also, he's still more towards the 3 than the 1. You know what I mean? He's still pretty much a mainstream economist, and he's, to the extent that he's gonna kind of temper his position is obvious. But the fact that he's basically not joining all these other voices, I think, is still pretty significant. Now, here's the best part of the thread. This is really the part that the reason I'm making this video, because this explanation is really good. How can gouging cause inflation? Even if corporations have monopoly power, weren't they already exploiting it to the max so that it caused high but not rising prices? Well, let's get wonky and learn from labor economics. Now, this argument, not the one that he's making, the one that he's criticizing, that, well, if all these companies are monopolies or oligopolies or cartels, well, shouldn't they raise prices already? And I'm pretty sure I've seen this from Noah Smith, some other wise ass, sort of kind of the hairs of the Freakonomics era of economics make this argument. And here is Paul Krugman brilliantly debunking it. And like I said, this is why I loved this thread. Many economists who study the evolution of wages, for example, the Great Compression of the 1940s, which lasted for decades, end up invoking the role of norms. But how can these matter in the face of supply and demand? One answer is that when a wage or price setter has market power, small deviations from the profit-maximizing price have only second-order effects on profits. This in turn implies that seemingly small considerations like fear of consumer or political backslash can inhibit firms from charging or paying what the traffic will bear, i.e. firms don't cut wages in recessions because they worry about morale. So yeah, there is a sort of social element and political element that prevents companies, even in a market where they are dominant, from taking full advantage of the monopoly surplus that they could obtain from that market. So in normal circumstances, even monopolies are restrained. Even if you've seen the sort of classic economics chart on monopoly, that whole triangle that they're taking over is not in practice what they actually take. They take a much smaller part of this. And firms sometimes hesitate to raise prices, at least visibly, hence the phenomenon of shrinkflation, where you make stuff smaller rather than hike prices. Yeah, I don't know, when I was a kid, the Big Mac seemed way bigger. Maybe it was just I was smaller, but we've seen this, and surely you've all seen this. Every product you buy now is smaller than it used to be. There will be less backlash if lots of prices are also going up. So it's not all crazy to suggest that some corporations are feeling freer than usual to exploit their market power, adding to inflation. How big a factor is this? We have no idea. But the venom with which some economists and commentators are rejecting the very possibility is puzzling and disturbing. It would be one thing if Dems were doing a Hugo Chavez and demanding that the Fed roll the presses while we use price controls to suppress inflation, but they aren't. Heck, they aren't even doing a Richard Nixon. Even the Warren bill, while it would require large firms to offer explanation for price hikes, is far short of a true price control measure. If you think that would be too intrusive, okay, but the anti-price gouging rhetoric I'm hearing is bizarrely over the top. When everything else going on, why get so worked about this issue? Something isn't right here. Well, the reason is ideological. Absolutely ideological. None of these economists want to give an explanation that cedes even an inch of ground into assuming that economics involves power, because that has been kind of the aim of the neoliberal project, to eliminate any sort of discussion about power relations in economics, insofar as only markets influence the behavior of economic agents. Then power has no role in this. And they've been absolutely adamant of trying to eliminate this factor. And also the fact that it's kind of messy. It adds another element that you need to now, mathematically model. If you're going to have a neat little series of equations that explains everything. So this adds another dimension. Why would you want to make things more complicated? Just talk about the market aspects. Don't talk about the power ones. And, well, this makes a lot of sense if you think about it. Any company that's hiking prices, and it's the only, you have one company in one market that's the dominant company in that market, and suddenly, with normal inflation of 2-3%, they decide to hike by 15-20. You would immediately have the shareholder calls leaked, the arguments given by these people, and there would be a backlash. They would focus just on that company or that market. Whereas now, you have a very good excuse to say that, hey, my input costs are higher, which maybe they're not. The global environment is challenging. We don't know how many profits we're going to make this year. We have to hike prices. Or we need to protect our staff, which of course they don't care. The companies that are using this as an excuse to protect their staff are the same ones who are busting unions. So that's really it. Basically, a lot of companies have the excuse to do something that in any other conditions the focus would be on them. But now, since everyone's doing it, they can do it, and any company can join in. And what was, I think, so obvious about this argument is that in those calls, that many of them have been shared. I've heard them. Again, people like Matt Stoller have been tweeting this all the time. They're saying the quiet part out loud. When they're actually speaking to potential investors, to shareholders, whatever, they are saying it. We're rising prices because it's a good opportunity to do so. And what does good opportunity mean? Well, that they won't face any backlash. So it's, and then what they're saying to the press is completely different. So, believe what they're telling the people that have some sort of monetary relationship to them. Don't listen to them, to what they say on the press. So, yeah, that's the argument. This is a story, I think, of a lot of, there's plenty of evidence from social psychology and from the behavioral science of how, if people are doing something immoral or illegal around you, it's more likely that you'll do it, simply because more people around you are doing it. So this is just not surprising. I see this in, for example, corruption in Mexico. The reason why so many Mexicans are corrupt is because many Mexicans are corrupt. Those same Mexicans, if they went to Norway, would not be corrupt. So, yeah, when you're in an environment where certain behavior is permissible, then everyone does it. Everyone does it. So, yeah. And, the standard explanations that you see on, I see some of the replies on Twitter, and I just want to, blow my brains out. I think economics is one of those subjects that so many people love to trash, and there's almost a direct relationship with how little they know about it. And I don't want to sound a bit smug, and I don't want to sound like an expert, and economists are the only ones who can speak about economics. No, this is just, you can spend a few hours reading about inflation and then just know the basics of what you're actually talking about, because then you see some of the replies to comments or tweets, and they're ridiculous. The standard sort of neoliberal or libertarian arguments. There was for a tweet by Jeff Bezos. Actually, we should search for that one. Yeah, there we go. He just popped up. That's amazing. I didn't do anything, I swear to God. Yeah, so look, this is the richest man, or second richest man now in the world. The newly created disinformation board should review this tweet, or maybe they need to form a new non sequitur board instead. Raising corporation taxes is fine to discuss. Taming inflation is critical to discuss. Mushing them together is just misdirection. This over a Joe Biden tweet mentioning that wealthy corporations should pay their fair share. Yeah. And then he quotes, I'm familiar with this guy. This is the only time I'll ever agree with him on anything. But he replies to him and says, "This is so silly. The deficit is decreasing because we're not doing pandemic aid anymore, and federal receipts are up because of inflation. Congress or the Biden administration didn't do anything to lower the deficit. In fact, the administration tried hard to inject even more stimulus into an already overheated inflationary economy, and only Manchin saved them from themselves." So this is the reason why Manchin is so important to these people, because he does everything that is in the interest of people like Bezos. Inflation is a regressive tax that hurts the least affluent. Oh my God. If you care about the least affluent, why don't you fucking unionize your workers? I'm not going to do that. He doesn't care. He doesn't care. Misdirection doesn't help the country. Well, neither does your piss poor economic skills. You see these, the arguments. I think it was this one that I just saw the replies, and just ridiculous. There was a lot of I think he's being trolled, which is good. But there were a lot of libertarian type arguments, and sort of we need to stop printing money. Look, I will never stop sharing this chart, which is basically the red line is the consumer price index, as in inflation, and the other is the Fed's balance sheet. That is the money that's being printed. On the same scale, that's the difference. That's all the money that was printed. The blue line, that's inflation. No correlation whatsoever. Period. End of story. Whereas the evidence of the concentration of markets is quite significant. This was the Economist, which I know is very free market, but they do seem to take the lack of the kind of free marketeers that kind of, maybe they're just not that smart and don't realize that the freer the market is, the more deregulated it is, the less competition you end up with. But anyway, This was a really thorough chart of showing, and I have a similar one that's a bit easier to read in my book. So if you buy my book, there's a chapter that has a section on competition, and there's basically an industrial survey that is published every couple of years in the US, and it lists what are the four largest firms, what market share they have in each of these industries. And for the most part, almost every industry since the late 90s up to today is more concentrated than it was. And you can see the bubbles here. All the firms that are left of the line are firms that have become more concentrated since what year is this? 1997 to 2012 or 2007. So that's the reality. The more that the US economy has been deregulated, the lower the taxes, the more advantages basically given to firms, the less competitive that it is. Here's an article from Brookings as well. Here's some of the industries and how much more concentrated they've become. Like retail is shocking. 416% between 1982 and 2012. That is crazy. I suspect this is basically Walmart and Amazon. Services 47%. Manufacturing 9%, not much, but they're already. Finance 135. Yeah, that is crazy. I mean, finance was basically after the crisis because a lot of the banks disappeared, and the ones that were left languishing were bought up by others. So that is the economy that you end up with. Here's some of the markets and just how concentrated they are. So search engines, basically, that's it. 3 of them. Kind of 4. Wireless carriers, 4. Delivery services, 3. Pay TV, 4. Smartphones, 2. Yeah. Airlines. Airlines are a fantastic story, by the way. If you want to read about the best example of an industry that at one point was competitive and now it's just become basically, a 4-company cartel, airlines. And this chart is also really good, and I have a very similar one in my book as well. This is net investment relative to net operating surplus. What does this mean? Net investment, the net just means minus depreciation. This is, the argument is that, well, companies need to have those profits because then they'll invest more, and investment is falling. So we want companies to be more profitable so that they invest more. That is a bullshit argument, an absolute bullshit argument. And this chart debunks it entirely. So the ratio of investment relative, so net operating surplus is obviously what what a company basically has to do whatever it wants with it. And over time, they chose to invest less. That's a fact. So more of that money, where does that go to? Share buybacks, dividends, executive pay, everything except investing. So don't buy this argument that the more profitable a company is, the more it will invest. That is just not true. And I think we've exhausted this subject, and not much more to say other than, I'm glad Krugman made a pretty interesting thread after a number of Twitter L's over the past couple of months. But I hope someone with his authority sort of chipping into this debate and telling the extremists, guys, drop it. Drop it. It's not entirely because of these market factors. You have to concede that price gouging, which is the result of market power, has something to do with this. And again, if you're on the left, you've known this. So we've been right yet again. So yeah, thanks for watching this video, and yeah, I'll keep doing videos. No plans of ending this channel. I know that my near daily production of videos is not happening again anytime soon, at least for the next month or weeks. But I will try and make a banger every couple of days. So yeah, the channel is alive and well. I am alive and well. And I will see you next time.